Welcome everybody to our Monday night class on psychological issues, and like every Monday night I'll try to connect it with the parsha, but this week it's too easy. And actually the problem is that there's so many things in this parsha that are psychological in nature that it's hard to focus in on just on one thing. And all day long I was debating between two completely different classes, and I'm still debating. I haven't finished debating. I haven't decided yet. But I guess the topic that we'll talk about is what I wrote on Facebook. And on Facebook I called the class Evil Before God. And to understand this title, we're going to need to look again at the story of what this parsha tells us about, all the different services that the high priest would do on Yom Kippur in the temple. Sorry about that. And one might say that the highlight of all the service that was done, there were two highlights. One was, one couldn't be seen, at least not directly, it was seen indirectly, which was the high priest entering the Holy of Holies and bringing the incense there and praying there. But there was another highlight, or sort of like one might say that in terms of the process that people went through when they viewed the service in the temple on Yom Kippur, the highlight was really the moment of casting a ballot, as it were, between two goats that had to be identical. They had to be of the same age, the same stature, had the same coloring, and so on. And just by chance, as it were, one goat became a sacrifice that was sacrificed in the temple, and the other became the scapegoat, the one that was taken out into the desert. And there, seemingly, it was killed. But this moment of having to decide, this chance event, was very powerful. It was very powerful also in the sense of the lesson that it tried to teach through the service. This is one of the things that's hard for us modern people to imagine, but in a certain way, what people saw in the temple was actually sort of like a play. It had meaning, it had a climax, it had a resolution, and it had, I don't know how to call it exactly, although it didn't always have to end happily. But the temple service, beyond being serving God, is actually like a lab in which the psyche, everything that we are, was sort of put on display and then worked with. And then it went through a process, it went through something that happened to it. So this notion of there being two identical goats, that now one is going to become a sacrifice to God and the other one is going to become a sacrifice, as it were, not clearly how this is going to happen outside the temple, to who is it being sacrificed, why is it being killed. This has a very strong parallel in the psyche. And to decipher the images, we have to understand what they mean, and to understand the whole play that's going on here. So we have to first of all understand the images and what they represent. So before we continue, I just gave a short introduction. I'd like to read the verses themselves to remind everybody of what actually happened. And then we're going to look at the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra. He's one of the early commentaries on the Chumash. Then we'll look at the Ramban, Nachmanides. And from there, we'll turn to something that the Baal Shem Tov taught about this, and we'll try to understand and decipher this whole picture that's going on in the temple, and understand what kind of, how it affects our psyche, how it affected the psyche of the people that were alive at the time who saw it, and how we can gain from it by learning from it today. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, and this is what I want, hopefully. Okay. So I'm going to read a few verses just so that we get into the topic. This is from the second verse of the parsha. God said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine," meaning into the Holy of Holies behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark. Right inside the Holy of Holies was the ark, and on top of it was the cover. And cover actually sounds, even in English, the same as the word in Hebrew, kaporet, that is upon the ark lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. For I shall appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus, only thus, meaning only in this way, shall Aaron enter the shrine, the Holy of Holies, with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, meaning he has to bring these offerings, these sacrifices. And he shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic with linen breeches next to his flesh, meaning these are not the usual 8 golden garments worn by the high priest, but rather simple white garments made out of linen, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are sacral vestments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. All this is a description of what needs to happen on Yom Kippur. And from the Israelite community shall take 2 he-goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. So this is the first time we encounter these 2 goats that we're going to be talking about. Aaron is to offer his own bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and for his household. And now, this is the highlight. Aaron shall take the 2 he-goats and let them stand before God, standing before God, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, meaning at the entrance of the tabernacle, of the inner part of the tabernacle. And he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for God and the other marked for Azazel. So these were like 2 wooden plates, and one it said for God and the other one it said for Azazel. And they were put into mixed up in some little box, and someone would take these 2 out and he would put one over each of the goats, one of these over each of the goats, and then he would show them. And so there would be on one goat would be for God, it would become a sacrifice, a sin offering, and the other one would say for Azazel, and it would be taken out into the wilderness, into the desert. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for God, which he is to offer as a sin offering, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before God to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. So we'll see here that there's a very important point that even though this goat is sent off into the wilderness to Azazel, and we still have to know what that is, we don't know what that is yet. Before that, as the other goat, its twin, is being offered as a sin offering, meaning it's being slaughtered, and then the blood of every sin offering of this type has to be squirted on the, or inside the holy, inside the sanctuary. All this time, the second goat, which was designated by Lot to go to Azazel, stands in front of the sanctuary. It has to stand there. And then Aaron does a few other things. And then he has, during this time, he brings the incense into the Holy of Holies. I'm not going to read all this. He shall then slaughter the people's goat of sin offering, bringing its blood behind the curtain, and do with its blood as he has done with the blood of the bull. He shall sprinkle it over the cover and in front of the cover. So the one that was slaughtered for God, the blood, as we said, has to be brought into the Holy of Holies. And it's this sin offering, this goat, that is what atones, as it were. That's what causes the atonement. And it says when he goes into the make expiation in the Holy of Holies, nobody else shall be there in the tent of meeting until he comes out, when he has made expiation for himself and his household and for the whole congregation of Israel. And he does all that. And then, remember, there's still this goat on the outside. So the goat that's on the outside, which is going to go in a moment to the wilderness, he's been in front, alive, in front of the sanctuary this whole time. Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man, somebody who was designated to take the goat to the wilderness. Thus the goat shall carry on it all their iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. So set free really means that it was pushed off a cliff. And then Aaron comes back into the Holy of Holies and he takes out the incense that he had left there. And that's basically the end of the service. There's a few more things he needs to do, and that's the end of the service. So really this was the climax and the highlight, the lot that was put between one goat going for God and the other one going to Azazel. So what is this Azazel? What exactly are we talking about? So let's see what the Ibn Ezra says. He said, I don't have an English translation, unfortunately, so I'm just going to have to translate it quickly in Hebrew into English. So he says like this. This lot thing, Goralot means lots. It's known from the tradition of our forefathers. Says the Gaon, one of the sages in the few hundred years before the Ibn Ezra, he lived in 1200 about, Ki Azazel Shem Ha, that Azazel is the name of a place. And it's called that because it's a very harsh, difficult land. And Az in Hebrew means bold and hard. So it's a very difficult place. And God commanded to take the goat there And a goat in Hebrew here is called a sa'ir. Sa'ir means that it is hairy. It has a lot of hair. The goat, after age 3, or between age 2 and 3, in its 3rd year, becomes very hairy, very long hair. And to sacrifice it there, so it's a very strange thing. It's not exactly sacrificed. It's thrown off the cliff. It's not sacrificed in the regular way. And at the end of our parsha, we learned that if you designate something as a sacrifice for God, you have to slaughter it inside the temple grounds. You can't slaughter it anywhere else. So how does this actually work? So he says, it's very similar to what we read in this Shabbos with the leper, that the way that he becomes purified after he's healed from this spiritual sickness is he has to bring 2 birds, and one of the birds is slaughtered, and the other bird is let free on the field, al pnei hasadeh, in a place where it's a wilderness, where there's nobody living there. Okay, so all this is very good. The question still is, why is it not slaughtered? Why is this goat not slaughtered like every other sacrifice? Why is it thrown off the cliff? So he says here, he goes back and he says, no. It's a type of sacrifice, but it's not the usual thing. And then the Ibn Ezra ends with something of a riddle. He says, if you could understand the secret that lies behind the word Azazel, you would know the secret of this goat and the secret of its name. For it has other exemplars in the Torah. And I will tell you some of its secrets when you're 33. This is what the Ibn Ezra says. What do you mean when you're 33? So it's well known that Nachmanides, who was a little bit after the Ibn Ezra, he didn't like the Ibn Ezra's riddles, so he decided to reveal them all. And he sort of ruined his thing. But you have to understand that the Ibn Ezra was not concealing it because he wanted to play tricks or games. He was concealing it because this was considered to be a very difficult topic. It was a topic that if you're not ready for it, you shouldn't be learning it. So you need to be ready. So the Ibn Ezra counted on the fact that if somebody was wise enough to understand his riddle and solve it, he was probably ready to understand the topic that's hiding behind this story of the goat that's sent out to the wilderness. So let's see what Nachmanides writes. He says like this. He quotes the Ibn Ezra, and he quotes this part at the end, when you're 33 you'll know, and he right away says, what does the Ibn Ezra mean? He means after 33 verses. You don't have to be 33 years old. You have to count 33 verses from this verse, from the verse in which Ibn Ezra wrote this, which was Leviticus 16:8, and you count 33 verses, you come to another verse in our parsha, and that verse talks about the fact that you're not allowed to slaughter an animal as a sacrifice outside the temple. Why? Because if you do it that way, then it's like you're serving another god. Like you're saying that there's somebody else. Who is this other god? So says Nachmanides like this. The Ibn Ezra, he was careful to conceal. And I am a blabbermouth. And I'm going to tell you the secret. Why am I going to tell you the secret? Because it says Nachmanides. What's the big difference between Nachmanides and the Ibn Ezra? The Nachmanides is a master of the Torah's concealed tradition, the Sod. And the Ibn Ezra was the pshat of the pshat. He was a person who only dealt with the literal, at least in his commentary on the Torah. And when it came to anything that was, call it Kabbalistic in nature, the Ibn Ezra tried to stay away, even though he has some books in which he deals with some more esoteric topics of Torah, but he never really gets into anything that you could call mystical. But as we'll see now, this whole class is going into the direction that the mystical is really in the end the psychological. That's really what we're talking about. So says the Nachmanides. The sages have already revealed this. For instance, in the Medrash Bereshis Rabbah, it says there, "V'nasa seir alav ze Esav," that this he-goat will take the sins of the Jewish people out of the wilderness. Say the sages in the Medrash, that's Esav, Esau. Shneimar, hen Esav achi ish seir. For it says about Esav that he was a hairy man. So understand that Esav, he's the exemplar of this he-goat. He's what this he-goat represents. It's a very strange thing to say. Even when the sages said this, what exactly did they mean? What are you trying to say? On the other hand, Jacob was a simple man, a sincere man. And it says, from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, and he says that there it says that for this reason, not yet clear what the reason is, but for this reason, on Yom Kippur we would give a bribe to the evil inclination, Samech Mem as he's called, so that he not get in the way of our other sacrifice, the one that goes before God, that's for God. Right? There were two he-goats. So one is a bribe, and the other one is the real sacrifice. This becomes stranger and stranger from moment to moment, right? We wanted to decipher what the images mean, but they seem to be getting stranger and stranger. So there's a bribe involved. And all the sins of Israel were put on this bribe, on the scapegoat. And then he says, when all the sins were put on this bribe, then the evil inclination sees that the Jewish people don't have any sins. And then he himself praises the Jewish people. And he says, what kind of people did you create? These people, they're like angels. The angels, I know, they don't eat, they don't drink. But the Jewish people, I see that they don't eat and don't drink either. So he's all impressed by what's going on. So what does all this help? So says the Nachmanides that the reason that the Ibn Ezra connected this to slaughtering outside the temple, then bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, needs to be understood as an act of desperation. Why would somebody bring a sacrifice and not bring it to the temple? Why would he do it outside the temple? So says Nachmanides, this is a type of act of desperation. Serving other gods is an act of desperation. What's the desperation? What kind of desperation is there in serving another god? So to fully understand this, we're going to have to talk a little bit more about what a sacrifice actually means. When somebody brings a sacrifice to God, he's basically saying, my actions are devoted to the good. We've talked about this in past classes. The problem with that is that maybe when I'm young, or let's say I've been reset, I come out of Yom Kippur feeling all cleansed and pure, and I say to myself, from now on, everything that I do will be for the good. That's very common. Most people feel that way. And then you start living your life again, and you've got these 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and then you've got Sukkot, so it's an easy time to follow that decision. But then you come into the winter months, and life begins to become normal again. And quickly we find ourselves that we're not really able to hold by that decision. And that there's a lot of negative things creeping up into our lives. Bringing a sacrifice is like saying, I want to reset. I want in the middle of the year to reset. I want to redevote myself only to the good. I want to decide from now on, every single morning, I want to wake up at 6 a.m. like I want to, or 5 a.m., or every person when they want to. I'm going to sit and learn my daily learning. I'm going to do what's needed. I'm going to surprise my family and make breakfast for them, whatever it is. And then the next morning comes and I haven't slept enough, or it's cold outside, or it's hot outside, or whatever it is, and things don't work out. So over time, we begin to collect the feeling. It becomes more and more, it becomes heavier from day to day, that we're not so good. That though we may understand that it's better to lead a life that's devoted to the good, we're not very capable of doing that. And we begin to give up. It says Nachmanides that at some point there's a feeling of desperation, of abandonment, that I have no hope, and I'm never going to change, and I'm always going to be, in the end, overtaken by the negative inside of me. And so there comes this act of desperation which says, this is really desperation. It's more than just a feeling that I have no hope, that I'm a lost cause. It's beyond that already. It's a feeling that at some level I have to appease the negative. I have to appease the other side in me. Because otherwise it's never going to leave me alone. The act of sacrificing to a false god comes in a person who doesn't believe in false gods, doesn't worship idols. It comes in as an expression of despair. Simply despair. The sacrifice is meant to say, leave me alone. Leave me alone. I'll give you your due, just leave me alone. And what does it mean, I'll give you your due? Well, here, in the terms of a sacrifice, if it's an actual sacrifice, if you actually take the he-goat and you sacrifice it out in the field, and you offer it as a sacrifice to whatever's in the field, then that's a sign of giving up and saying, if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, join them here means that I have not been able to conquer the evil in me, the negative in me, the evil in the world, the negative in the world, and so I have only one option, which is to serve it. at one level or another. So most people don't serve evil like a caricature. They don't become like the evil clown or somebody who's just a mass murderer or anything like that. Most people don't do that, thank God. But if there are pockets of evil inside of me, pockets of inability to overcome the negative inside of me, so a sacrifice would mean I gave up on it. I've given up. I've given in. And it's like saying, this is just who I am and what I am. And I have to deal with it. I have to admit it to myself. I have to admit to myself that in the end, there's a powerful force in me that I cannot control, and I have to abandon myself to it. That's what's called a sacrifice in the field. And the reason that this is called a sacrifice to Azazel is because Azazel, there's all kinds of explanations, all of them pretty much go to the same direction. Azazel represents despair, a state of despair. Why Esav? How did Esav get into this? Esav was the first person to express utter despair from life. If you've heard any of my classes in the past 10 years, I talk about this a lot. When Esav is 15 years old and he's being chased by whomever he's being chased, and he comes to Jacob and he says to Jacob, quick, feed me this red stuff that you've made. And Jacob says, I'll feed it to you, but sell me your firstborn rights. What are the firstborn rights? Very interesting. What are the firstborn rights? So somebody would say the firstborn rights are that the firstborn gets twice as much of an inheritance as the children that were born after him. But that's not the argument that Jacob made. Jacob wanted the firstborn rights, the ability to sacrifice the family's sacrifices, meaning to lead the spiritual service of the family. That's what the firstborn was meant to do in each family. The firstborn had the right to sacrifice. And the right to sacrifice means, if we talk about this psychologically, to sit on the chair and to psychoanalyze everybody else. That's really what it means. It means to lead people spiritually. It means to lead them psychologically. And he convinced Esav by telling him, we're going to come to a moment to Esav's despair. I'm just giving you the background. He convinced him by telling him it's a very dangerous business to be the one with the firstborn rights, because if you slaughter incorrectly, you've shed blood for no reason, and you're susceptible to being punished by heaven. So why do you need this, Esav? It's the same problem that every therapist has. If you slaughter the other person's animal soul the wrong way, and you hurt them during the therapy instead of causing good, then you're susceptible to be punished by heaven. Who told you to? It's like every doctor. Do no harm, at least. Esav agrees, but he doesn't just agree because of Jacob's argument. Esau says, I'll sell my firstborn rights to you, for I am going to die, and what do I have to do with firstborn rights? What benefit can they give me? Now, the literal meaning is that Esau was so out of breath that he was about to die. But we know that that's not the case. He's a 15-year-old, very strong, very wild young man. He wasn't going to die. Esau was not talking about his imminent death. He was talking about the end, the demise of every individual. For Esav, that was a cause of despair. I'm going to die, so what in the world, or how in the world could I benefit from these firstborn rights? What good would it do me anyway? What does it mean I'm going to die? I've despaired of life. Who despairs of life? God is life. The goodness is life. So a person who's despaired of goodness, who's despaired of godliness, he's the person who feels that he's going to die. And that's what Esav felt. So Esav is like this person who sacrifices in the field. He's given up. And he said, I have no hope. I'm going to die. I cannot join the living. I cannot join the goodness. I am what I am. I admit it. And therefore, my only course of action is to abandon my hope in the good. Nothing good will ever come out of me. And that's it. So take the firstborn rights. I'm going to die anyway. Esav was the first person to express exactly this sentiment of sacrificing outside the temple. Again, a sacrifice inside the temple is like a reset, like a recommitment to the good. A sacrifice outside the temple is like giving in to the negative inside of me and saying, I just have to accept it. So what does Nachmanides mean here? When he says that we give a bribe to the evil in the field. You have to bribe the evil. What does that mean? What do you mean bribe the evil? You can't bribe it. Is it going to leave you alone because you bribed it? So, I don't know how Nachmanides' words were understood. He wrote them about 800 years ago. I don't know how they were understood for 6 centuries. 5 centuries. I mean, I'm sure people understood this. But until you come to the Baal Shem Tov, I don't know of a coherent explanation, at least coherent to our times, to the way the modern person thinks, that really explains what he means by you bribe the evil inclination by sending the goat out but not slaughtering it. To understand this, we have to look at one more source before we look at the Baal Shem Tov himself. And this source I'm just gonna quote. I'm gonna stop sharing the screen also. I'm just going to quote. What Nachmanides wrote is that, and the Ibn Ezra, they both quoted the Talmud in the Babylonian Talmud that describes what happens to the goat. So what happens to the goat? It's thrown off a cliff, so it dies. It's even a goat can't survive something like that, so it dies. In the Jerusalem Talmud, which to a certain extent, the Jerusalem Talmud is more, if I would have to say, more realistic in a certain sense. It doesn't talk so much in simile, it doesn't talk so much in parables. It's more realistic, more literal. So the Jerusalem Talmud says something a little bit different. It says that the goat was pushed off a cliff, but the cliff wasn't exactly a cliff. It was more like a steep decline. And being that it's a goat, sometimes it was able to survive. In fact, it says that all the years of Shimon HaTzadik, who was a Kohen Gadol, he was a high priest in the time of the Second Temple, that he was 70 years a high priest. During those 70 years, every single time that they pushed the goat off the cliff, it died. But after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, and there were high priests that were not as good as he was, not as righteous as he was, so sometimes, pretty much half and half, the goat would run off into the wilderness. It survived the fall easily. It got up, shook itself, and then ran off into the wilderness, and then would be eaten by the people traveling the wilderness would find it and use it for food. Why is this important? Because if the goat represents the evil in us, then not slaughtering it, meaning not sacrificing it to the evil forces, as it were, not seeing the evil as inevitable and therefore sacrificing to it, means that we acknowledge that there's evil inside of us, but we don't have to kill it. It doesn't have to be killed. The acknowledgement is like this. This is where the fine line is. And it's a very fine line because everything in the psyche is very delicate. There's the one option, which is I completely succumb to my evil and say I need to sacrifice, meaning I offer it, I'm giving from myself to the source of evil. That's the one option. The other option is what was done in this temple service, which is to come and say, I acknowledge the fact that I've done wrong. And I offer you the wrong in me, the evil in me, a bribe. Why a bribe? Because I acknowledge the fact that I cannot yet completely get rid of you. That's what I acknowledge. Not that you've won. Not that I am hopelessly negative. Not that I am without repair, that I'm a lost cause. But that for now, all I can do is admit that yes, I've done wrong, but I'm not sacrificing to you. I'm not saying this is a road with no return. This is not a one-way street. For now, I have to admit the fact that yes, I have some negative things in me. Maybe a lot of negative in me. The scapegoat is big enough to put all the sins of all the people, all the Jews, everybody on it. There's a lot of evil there. There's a lot of negativity there. But it's not sacrificed. It's just thrown out. This is called a bribe. Now, to understand this fully, like I said, it was very hard, I think, to understand this until the Baal Shem Tov came and explained it. So the Baal Shem Tov says like this, Tehillim, in chapter 119, that says, Chishavti drachai, ve'ashiva raglai eledotecha. He says, I've calculated my ways, and Chishavti drachai v'ashiva raglai eledotecha. Says the Baal Shem Tov, I know, what does this verse mean? It means I've calculated my ways and I return my feet to your commandments. It's a very strange verse, not exactly clear. What is he saying, says the Baal Shem Tov? What is David saying there? David is saying that a person has to calculate their path. You can't live your life assuming that you're just good. You can't do that. That's naive. You have to know that there is something inside of you that will always demand its portion. What is this something inside of you? That's the negative part. And the negative part is not willing to let you do good until you give it something. So says the Baal Shem Tov, and this is the way that Rav Ginsburg usually explains it. The beginning of the verses, I left out the beginning of the verse a little bit on purpose, but also because it's what changes everything. it's the verse before it. It says, in the middle of the night I wake up in order to praise you. So the Baal Shem Tov puts these two verses together and he says like this, that in order for a person to be able to wake up when they want to, in this case, in the middle of the night to say Tikkun Chatzot or whatever they want to do, meaning they want to stop giving the body its needed sleep, they want to stop giving their cravings what they want. Says the Baal Shem Tov, you can't just do it by waking up in the middle of the night. It won't work. You have to calculate your ways. You have to take into consideration the fact that you have a negative inclination. And the negative inclination is not going to let you do what you want to do. Again, this is just an example. Every person has their middle of the night that they want to wake up at, right? Which might be any other good thing that they want to do. And the evil inclination will stop them. One option would be to just give up, sacrifice to the evil inclination, and say, the sacrifice would be like saying, the middle of the night belongs to you, it doesn't belong to me. That's what it would mean to bring a sacrifice in the field in this case. I've been trying to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to learn for the last 10 years. I've never succeeded. And so I now pronounce officially that 5 o'clock in the morning does not belong to me. I just can't do it. That's a sacrifice in the field. Instead, says the Baal Shem Tov, you have to acknowledge, meaning not to give in to the evil, which is really not to want to change. It's really just to give up. You have to acknowledge that it's powerful, and you have to give it its part. So what do? Says the Baal Shem Tov, to get up in the middle of the night. That's his example. I guess that's maybe something that he coped with, or somebody that came to him coped with. He says, you can't wake up in order to go and pray or to learn. You have to wake up to go drink coffee. You have to wake up to go eat some pudding. You have to wake up for something that the body wants. Something that you have a physical craving for. That you have physical needs involved in. That's called a bribe. The bribe is not something forbidden. I can't give something that's not permitted, but I can give you something that you want. You want this he-goat, don't you? Okay, here, come take it. Sometimes the he-goat would die on the cliff, sometimes it wouldn't. There are two options. I don't know what will come out of this. This coffee that I'm going to drink in the middle of the night, it's going to be very sweet. I'm going to make it extra sweet. I'm going to make it such that it's the best cup of coffee I've ever had. Or if it's pudding or whatever it is, it's going to be the best pudding I've ever had. And I don't know whether in the end this will serve the negative or not. I don't know whether I'm strengthening the negative or not. Says the Baal Shem Tov, in fact, it's almost certain that not only am I not strengthening the negative, I'm actually just grazing its needs. I'm not really feeding it. Because what does it want? What does it really want? It wants total capitulation. It doesn't want just, a he-goat thrown off the cliff. It doesn't want just a cup of coffee. It wants me to keep sleeping. That's what it really wants. But this is the trick here. That when you're dealing with those things that are most difficult, you can't get 100% of what you want right away. You simply can't. Says the Baal Shem Tov, that's what it means not to be prideful. To be lowly, of the lowly nature, means to understand that I have to give a bribe. I am not yet at the level that I can go completely against my nature, completely against my negative inclination. So I have to give something. That's what the Nachmanides meant that this second goat, the scapegoat, is a bribe. And he says you have to be willing to give these bribes to the negative inclination in order to do the positive. In those places, you don't have to do it all the time. You only need it in those places where you're stuck, where you feel that you can't get over the opposition. In those places, you have to know how to use this he-goat, this scapegoat. So what does the temple service of the two goats teach us? The temple service was meant to suggest to us that, like the pasuk, there's a verse that says in Tehillim, there is no person who is righteous and doesn't do any evil. Says the Baal Shem Tov, even in the good that we do, there's some self-interest involved. There's always some negativity involved. Why? Because this is the nature of exile. I'm going to say a few words about this in a moment. It's a very powerful thought that he gives. He says, from the moment that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the world is mixed. There's evil in everything. We would think that in the temple we wouldn't give evil even a footrest. We wouldn't bring it in. But the Torah thinks different. And the Torah says that even in the temple, on the holiest day, understand that if you want to conquer the evil, you have to be willing to admit its existence and to deal with it. In order to not give in to it, you have to be willing to admit that it is a real problem. You can't just live in a hunky-dory world. As Rav Steinsaltz alav shalom used to say, if you wake up in the morning and the birds are chirping and everything's beautiful, then one of two things happened. Either Mashiach has come or you passed away in your sleep. Because the world is much more complex than that. You're much more complex than that. Everything is mixed with good and evil. There are considerations to say that things are good and that an act that was done was all good, and there are reasons to say no, it was the opposite. It was mixed with evil. It was mixed with self-interest. It was mixed with pride. It was mixed with this, with that, and the other thing. So somebody says here that it's a decoy. That's a great way to describe it. But again, Nachmanides calls it a bribe. So in the temple service, on the holiest day, the climax, the highlight was saying to people, you have to come and accept the fact that you're going to have to be dealing with the negative things in you, in the world. And to some extent, you're going to have to learn how to work with it. Because you can't assume that you're free of it. In fact, when does a person succumb to the evil? When does a person offer a sacrifice to the evil, giving into it? When they unrealistically assume that they're supposed to be perfectly righteous. When I can't admit my own shortcomings, my own fallacies, my own iniquities, that's when I'm most susceptible to the negative. But the more I can come to terms with it, that this is part of who I am, then I can deal with it, as David HaMelech, as King David says, in an intellectual, in an awake state. Chishavti drachai. I'll calculate my steps and figure out what is it that I can do in order to ensure that I am left alone to do the good. Now, There's another beautiful example of this. It's in second book of Kings, chapter 3, the very end of chapter 3. There was a war with Moab, and Moab was losing terribly. And their king, says the Medrash, well, the book of Kings says that he sacrificed his son on the wall of his city, and that caused the Jewish people to lose the war. And it's a terrible thing when you think about it. He sacrificed his son, and because he sacrificed his son, which is a terrible thing in and of itself, it caused the Jewish people to lose. How can we understand something like that? So the sages say, in the Medrash, what happened was like this. One option was that he asked his people, who is this nation? What's their great merit that they're able to vanquish me? And his people told him, they are the children of Abraham. Right? Moab are the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. They're the descendants of Abraham. What did Abraham do? He went to sacrifice his son to God, and because of that, of course he didn't, but because of that, they are victorious. So he said, I'll do the same thing and I'll actually sacrifice him. So that's one option. The other option in the Medrash says, that no, he said like this, I don't care about their God. I'm just interested in the action. So you're saying that sacrificing a child is a way to win, so I'll do the same thing to my idol. So why did that cause the Jewish people to lose? So the sages say, because they were guilty of many such iniquities themselves. And the moment that he did this, it awakened in the heavens the reckoning with the Jewish people themselves, that you're also guilty of the same things. You've also done the same terrible things. Why do I bring this strange story? Because one of the points that you can get from it is that when somebody is pushed to the wall, he's got his back against the wall and he's about to lose everything, he will sacrifice everything. The same is true of the evil inside of us. That if you think you're going to beat it completely and fully and 100%, you're not going to give it an inch, then it will fight back for its dear life and you will lose. That's what that story is saying. Like the king of Moab is like the evil inclination here. It will find a way to entrap you. Again, why? Because it comes from your feeling that somehow you're better. That somehow this is not your problem. It is. It's part of you. This is how God set up the world. That you have to continue fighting this part of you. And it's coming from you. But, and this is the big but, it should all be, we mentioned this in the beginning, that the scapegoat is placed before God the whole time that the other goat is sacrificed and all the work that was done inside the Holy of Holies. You have to feel constantly that you're in front of God. If you don't feel that in the end you're not, I'll say it this way, where does the pride come from? It comes from the fact that you feel that you're left, that you are in control. If a person feels that they're in control and somehow they do a sin and somehow they do something wrong and they say the wrong thing to somebody and they hurt somebody and so on and so forth, and they say, how could I have done this? What did I do? And so on and so forth. They can't come out of that. That's exactly succumbing to the evil. Because you felt that it's you and you alone. For this to work, you had to see the whole time in the temple the scapegoat standing in front of God, in front of the Holy of Holies, in front of the sanctuary. You have to feel that you're not here alone. You have to feel that this is how God built the world, for His reasons. I don't know why this is the evil I'm dealing with inside of me. But it is what it is. I didn't set up the world. I didn't create it. I didn't set up my life. I didn't give myself my abilities and my lack of abilities. I'm asked to do work from these circumstances. So I have to accept them that these circumstances were given by God. I have to feel that I'm standing in front of God. If I feel that I'm standing in front of God, then I won't feel that I've given in to the evil. I'll feel that I've done the work that needs to be done in order to work with what I have. So on the one hand, I don't expect myself to constantly be perfect. On the other hand, when I do negative things, when the evil rises up inside of me, the negative, call it the evil, the negative, whatever you want to call it, then I don't feel that it's the end of the world, and therefore succumb to it and bring a sacrifice in the field. Instead, I can conscientiously think about what is realistic in the sense of what am I able to do in order to be left alone by the evil, give it its part, and accept the fact that it also has a part in my life. What is this called? This is called suppression. So we had a whole series on defense mechanisms. So the main defense mechanism in psychology is repression. Repression is an unconscious act. All the defense mechanisms usually function in the beginning as unconscious mechanisms. They happen by themselves. Repression means that a person does something wrong and they repress it. They don't want to come to terms with the fact that they have negative things inside of them. They can't handle it. So they have to repress it. And, says Freud, repression comes back to bite you over the head. You can't repress things. Defense mechanisms that are not made conscious will eventually backlash. They will lead to psychosis. That's at least in his theory. What is that? That's exactly psychosis, is the giving up on something. Psychosis means this is just how I am. The difference between psychosis and any kind of mental problem that's not a psychosis is that one is chronic and the other one doesn't have to be. Your character, it becomes part of who you are. That's like sacrificing to the field. I mentioned this a number of times, a controversy every time I say it, but it's pretty well established that the thing called demons, Ibn Ezra mentions it in the verses discussing sacrificing outside of the temple, and Nachmanides mentions it. Everybody mentions this, that the seirim, the goats that are dancing outside, they're really what we call demons, shedim, shades. In psychology, the translation is very simple. That when you sacrifice outside, you're sacrificing to the shadows, to these shedim, to these seirim as they're called. It's basically making it a permanent fixture of yourself. Like we said before, sacrificing yourself to the evil. That's what a psychosis is. It's already like admitting that this is who I am. It can't be any different. It's a very desperate situation when you come to that. It feels like you can never free yourself anymore. But you can. I'm just saying that, like the way Freud says it, if it's unconscious, it will lead to psychosis. eventually. It doesn't have to, but more often than not. That's what defense mechanisms churn into if they're not made conscious. That's repression. Repression is to repress the evil inside of me. I'm not repressing other people's evil, I'm repressing mine. But there's another option, and that's the option that the Baal Shem Tov now explained, which is called suppression. And suppression is done consciously. That's what it means to be before God. To be before God is to act conscientiously. It's to act with consciousness, to be aware of what I'm doing. Being in front of God, facing God constantly, is focusing on what I'm doing and becoming conscious of what I'm doing. That's what it means to stand in front of God. If I would have to translate what it means to stand in front of God, it would mean that I am conscious, I'm aware of what I am doing. That's suppression. Suppression says, I'm aware of the fact that there's negative things inside of me. And I'm aware of the fact that I have to give them a bribe. I accept it. I didn't create myself. This is how God created me. I have no interest in them. I don't want them, but they're part of me. For now. So for now, I have to deal with them. But this is me. What do you mean this is me? I suppress them. To give them a bribe is to suppress them. Is to say, here's your part, leave me alone. Let me now go do what I want to do. That's suppression. I don't want to think about you. I don't want, meaning, imagine that our friend now, he's drunk a very hot, beautiful, delicious cup of coffee, and now he can sit down and learn or daven or do whatever he wants. So what does he need to think now? Oh, I'm so negative that the only way I could get up is by promising myself a cup of coffee. So I wasn't interested in davening. I wasn't interested in praying. I wasn't interested in anything. What was I interested in? I was interested in my cup of coffee. So what good is the good that I do? Because it's all out of self-interest. Suppression means understanding that the bribe that I gave is exactly that. It's the only way to work with the negative. There's no other way I can do it. I have to find a way to make it possible for me to serve the good. And that means being aware of the fact that there's negative things inside and that they need to be dealt with in some way. And that's the bribe, that's the suppression. That's what frees me and allows me then to go and serve the good with a clean conscience, because I've done what's needed to do in order to get there. And I didn't do the negative, where, drinking a cup of coffee is not such a negative thing, except if it's on Yom Kippur. But in general, the thing that I did, even though it was self-interest, it doesn't take away from the value of what I did after that. What it allowed me to do, what it encouraged me to do, what it promoted. I'm just going to end, and then I'll take the questions. I'm just going to end with one final thought. I mentioned that exile is a mix, is when good and evil are mixed together. And the first exile was the exile from the Garden of Eden. But the Baal Shem Tov says something even more powerful. That exile, by definition, is meant to be the time in which we learn to deal with evil. Okay? That needs to be developed a lot more. But the time of the exile is the time in which there is evil inside and evil outside, and we learn to deal with it as part of God's world. Lifnei Hashem, before God. What does God want with this? Why is this part of it? Why is it that some things can only be attained by these evil things, suffering, and so on and so forth? And one final thought is that there are two he-goats. Why? Because indeed, one of them teaches us how to realistically deal with evil. The other one goes to become a sin offering inside the Holy of Holies, and it atones perfectly for all the sins. That a person has to know that there is the option open of becoming completely cleansed of evil. That does exist. You can't live your whole life saying, I'm forever doomed to dealing with what I'm dealing with. No, there always has to be the hope that there's the other goat, and that goat is a sacrifice that goes to atone completely, and when it's finished, it's finished. There's nothing left of the evil. It's a different story altogether. And both stories have to be in the consciousness of every person at all times. Meaning, I'm now overcoming evil because I feel it, and I'll do everything I need to do in order to overcome it the way we just learned, by suppression. On the other hand, I don't expect there to be another time. There will not be another test. I don't have to think that way. I have to believe that once I'm finished with this test, that's it. Exile is over. Those two goats have to be identical, meaning they have to be the same size, meaning I have to be willing to exercise both options equally, completely equally. That here I am dealing with the evil, and I know now how to do it correctly by not ignoring it, by not saying I'm stronger than it, and not thinking that somehow it's not here. And on the other hand, I have to believe that this is the final and last time that I'm going to have to deal with it. And that the other goat is going to serve its purpose. And there will be full atonement in the world. And again, it's a goat. It represents the same evil, is going to be completely slaughtered and finished. Okay. So now, hopefully this was clear enough so that we can now maybe take some questions. Yeah. So Toby, you need to open your speaker.
I'm completely blown away by this share. It was so profound, and I found myself saying, like, there were so many concepts that you put out one after the other in the beginning that I just wanted you to wait, I want to understand. You know, you could talk probably at least an hour about each one, but I mean, I'm so personally, really impacted by it, because it was like you were speaking to me, because all my life I have tried to cope this way, and yet felt that I was doing something wrong, because it's what you're describing, like when you're talking about you want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to learn, but first you need to have a beautiful, perfect cup of coffee. So I guess I've only been able to survive by giving in at times. And like, I'll just throw out, like, when I was a student at university and I had a paper to write, and I would get into this complete state of paralysis and neurotic inability to be able to write the paper. So I was only able to move forward if I forgave myself enough and allowed myself to, I don't know, like, do something else that I really wanted to do, or like the cup of coffee. So maybe that wasn't necessarily in the context of a conscious service of Hashem, but it's definitely something that plays itself out over and over again, in my life today.
And then it causes you what to feel about yourself?
Say that again.
What does it cause you to feel about? How do you feel about yourself that you have to play it out again and again?
Well, I think that by hearing this share, I won't feel guilty. I won't feel as badly about whatever it is that I need to do, like the compromise that I make, for example.
So it's not a compromise, it's a bribe.
Well, I can throw out an actual example. I mean, I think that when you count the Omer, you're supposed to be standing up as you would when you say any tefillah, right? I have never been able to count the Omer through with the bracha. This year, two things. One, I have a reminder on my phone, and secondly, I gave myself a heter. Okay, Hashem has to please understand that I now allow myself to, if I forget to do it standing up properly, then if I'm already in bed, I just say it in bed, because, you know, and I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I feel like, okay, I'm giving into the laziness and of the Yetzer Hara, but at least this way I'm saying I'm counting the Omer. So is that a good example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, to a certain extent. No, to a certain extent, yes. To a certain extent.
Oh, I just want to ask, though, because it was always I mean, this really has always perplexed me also, but the Seir La Azazel, maybe also because a certain family member used to, when they were really angry at me, used to say L'chila Azazel. And it was probably a really bad thing to say. And I used to think it meant go to hell, which it kind of is. So what you just said about the equal, identical goats, I understand completely that it has to be like two equal choices. The choices have to seem equally...
possibilities.
Yes. But isn't there a danger of, in somebody's mind, they could be mistaken that there seems to be, you know, I'm not saying this really, not to mean blasphemy, but that it is a sort of an equal
No.
power.
The two things, no, it's not about the powers, God forbid. It's about two different outcomes. There are two possible outcomes. The outcome could be that this will just be another episode of me dealing with the evil inside, or this could be the final time that I deal with it because it's now going to be slaughtered. It's not going to come back ever again. Those are the two possibilities. It's not, God forbid, that I'm saying that they're equal. I don't know where in the world I said anything like that.
No, I'm not saying that you said
no,
that.
it says, so don't understand it that way.
It's always been...
I said, this only works, this whole way of thinking, only works if you're in front of God, before God. So this whole way of dealing with the negative only works if I know that Hashem set this up because He's in control of it all. I know that people think it's problematic to say that God created the evil. It's much more problematic to say that God didn't create the evil. Okay, that's a much scarier option. Because then you're saying that there are two forces in the world, and that's certainly not monotheism.
But if you're saying the korban in the Beit HaMikdash is, you know, la Hashem, it's to Hashem, and then the expression
now, Hashem means
Azazel,
everything is in front of Hashem. One goes to Hashem, as it were, and one goes to Azazel. Two ways of dealing with the evil. Am I going to deal with it by bribing it in the way that as we learned? Or is it going to be dealt with by God Himself, that He's just going to slaughter it and finish it off?
How would you translate Azazel?
What do you mean, Azazel? I said what it means. Despair.
Despair.
Azazel is a description of, you could say that that's why hell works very well, because in the Christian descriptions of hell, what is it? It's a place of despair. We said that that's Esav's, they invented this thing called hell. Okay? So that's Esav. Esav was living a living hell, which is what? that I'm going to die. Not that I'm going to die in 10 minutes and an hour and 10 days. I'm going to die eventually, and so there is no meaning to my suffering. There is no meaning to the battles I've fought against the negative inside of me. Because in the end, I'm going to die. So what's going to be left of it? He doesn't get it. Because he's not before God. He's always in front of something else. Something else in his ego. He's never just in front of God saying, this is your world, not my world. I didn't create it. And so he's in despair because he's not in control. He has to be in control somehow.
It's just very fitting because the person who used to say that, Azazel, to me, usually said it in a moment of despair.
Of course.
Desperation.
Because that's what it is. Okay, Ilana. Thanks, Toby.
So much.
Thank you so much. I can't hear you though. You have to be a little bit closer. Yeah.
That's all about. It says Mitzrayim, then it says, and you have to, and we need to mimic that, and you have to leave Mitzrayim with an outstretched arm, and leave the fat of the land and the flesh pots of Egypt, and then within days you'll see fantastic results. I can't exactly remember the word. I get the letter all the time, and I feel like I'm just supposed to turn. I just don't know what. I feel like I'm just supposed to open out, stop biting my Torah, just get rid of it, and turn into this.
That letter is saying that you have to be like the goat that goes into the Holy of Holies.
Yeah, but I can't do that. I'm much more.
So it's not saying that you have to do that. I didn't phrase it right. It's saying that half, that possibility is not strong enough in your eyes. You don't have that optimism, right? It's very optimistic. It's saying this is the last time I'm going to have to deal with this. Imagine somebody who has a chronic illness, and every time that it acts up, they're like, what? I have to deal with this again and again and again, until it becomes chronic, and they just sort of give up and they say, it can't change. That is giving up on the fact that there's also a goat that goes inside and it finishes the evil off. I know it's hard. I've been there. Where something seems chronic and
But it sounds like requiring action. Like, what is leave the flesh pots of Egypt, and what is the fat of the land?
For every person, that's something else. But fat of the land is exactly the bribe. To leave the fat of the land is to leave the bribing. Meaning, again, in the letter, I would have to see the letter, but knowing how the Rebbe thinks, at least partially from many letters, what it sounds like is that you have one side that works and one side that doesn't. You have the side of the bribe, the fat of the land, that works fine for you, but you don't see the total optimism of the other option. And that has to be equally strong in every person's life. Even though I mentioned it at the end, but again, I stress that these two goats have to be equal in size. They have to be equal in every way. So that option has to be just as strong.
Current is my current situation, and other one my anticipation of the next bit of future.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Hi, Sean. How are you?
Hi, Rabbi.
How are you feeling?
Very well, thank you. Good to see you all.
Good to see you too.
So, here's a question. How do we teach that to our children, to our teenagers? How do we tell them that this is this is a part of our job, right? Toiling. I mean, really, I appreciate this insight. I get it. It's very powerful. How do you tell that to a 17, 18, 19-year-old?
So you've chosen the hardest ages to talk to, right? 17, 18, 19 is a time when people don't have ears, right? They only have...
Or maybe, excuse me for interrupting, Rabbi, or maybe part of the process is going through it and finding what it means to stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So my own... my eldest is only 19, so I don't know what happens after that. And I can say that I've had mild success. not very much.
Now,
Not very much.
You're a Chassidic rabbi raising
And I've only had mild success. Very mild.
And you had a mild success. Imagine where the environment I live in.
Right. So, this is a systemic problem. It's not something that one person alone can solve. I'll say it like this: there's many facets to what I think needs to be done. First of all, the culture has to, we live in culture, and the culture has to reflect this. So the fact that there's not enough literature, media, that reflects this way of looking at the world, and actually stresses other ways of looking at the world, doesn't help. But the thing that, I can say that the day that I became a Chabad Chassid was the day that I realized that the time to say this to someone is when they're down, not when they're up. It was very hard for me. I grew up in a very different type of culture, which is very afraid of telling people things like this when they're down, when they're beaten down. I almost viewed it today. I can't even remember the feeling, but I can sort of recollect that it was like a feeling of taking advantage of them. Like I have this truth that they will only understand if they've been hurt in some way, and then when they're down on their luck, when they're weak, when they can't really make a conscious decision, then I suddenly offer them this panacea, this some healing, this will heal all your problems. So I felt like I was like those snake potions, snake oil peddlers, and here you go, this will heal this and heal that, and until I remember the day that it suddenly hit me that that's when a person needs it the most. The reason that they're there is because that apparently is the only way that they can hear it. And so not to be afraid of talking about these things when there's a difficult situation. Because, in the end, I think that most of us just learn from experience. And there's just no way to do it quickly. So some people do get it quickly. Some people understand at some level. The reason I said I have mild success in this is because if I ask my children to regurgitate this, they'll probably do a pretty good job. But it's mild success because they haven't yet tested this out in real world situations.
I understand. They haven't applied it yet to whatever internal experience they're having. Or that's the test, right?
Right. And then it's sort of like I've given them the vaccine, but I haven't given them the actual virus. So the vaccine's pretty good. It gives a lot of antibodies. But the whole test is when you get the virus itself. What does it do now? Is what we've prepared for, is it enough? And usually it's not enough. You still get a fever. You still have to fight it. You still have to work on it. And, there's no difference between me and a 17-year-old in the sense that I also understand this to a certain level that life has taught me, that Hashem has given me. And when I said before that the Baal Shem Tov says that exile is about coming to terms with the evil in the world, that's sort of what I meant, that since we're still in exile in many ways, then I imagine that there's going to be more tests. we're not finished, at least not at the personal level. So again, I have this other half that says completely optimistically, it's finished, it's done. There's never going to be another test again. And that, that has to be just as equally strong. But the other side of it says, and if there is a test, so we have the antidote, let's see if it works. Let's apply it.
Thank you.
There's a great question. Thanks. Toby, you wanted to say something more?
Was there someone else who, in the chat, I think somebody else had a question. If they, if you want to take them before me. But I was just thinking about all of this, and what keeps coming to mind is, and you please tell me if this is within the same getter of what you're speaking about. When I was young and I went through a really, really very difficult period, before I came to Eretz Yisrael, I had moved out of my parents' house, and I was very, very depressed, without going into my family background. But one day I picked up it was a Breslov booklet, one that they give out on the street, and my uncle had just brought it to Toronto from New York, and I started reading it, and that was probably the only thing that really was able to lift me up. And I had this insight that it says in the Torah, where it says that Hashem, I guess it's between Har Gerizim and Har Eval, and Hashem tells the people, I put before you this day, the blessing and the curse, and then it ends, choose life, right? So it's like the two goats, like, do they symbolize, one is life, and one is, going the path of recognizing the evil is like, almost like, it's giving in to death and everything that negates life, or am I completely off?
We're not giving in, we're dealing with.
I'm sorry?
We're not giving in. We're not sacrificing to evil. We're dealing with it. We're not ignoring its existence. We're finding ways to get over it, to succeed in spite of the fact that there is evil.
To fight it.
To fight it is not going to help. Maybe, well, if you can fight it and win, then it's not an issue. We're talking about the evil that can't be won, that you can't fight against. Those things that no matter what you try, they don't help. Nothing helps.
So is it also like that we're all really Bali Tshuva as opposed to Tzaddikim, and that those are the two paradigms of...
That's what we said. That the moment that you are willing to acknowledge the fact that you're not as righteous as you thought you should be, meaning you're willing to acknowledge that there is negative inside of you, then you can start this path called Chishavti Drachai, being conscious of it and dealing with it in some way, finding what works. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Sean, you want to say something more?
It's interesting. There is a part in Chumash, one of the early parashot, about God revealing to Abraham the future of his descendants, right? And Abraham saw the exile that we have to do. It's very interesting. I just realized that probably Abraham not only saw the actual physical exile, but God revealed to him the personal exile that his children are going to have to go through. And that was probably even more painful than the physical exile. Right?
I agree 100%. because it's your child. It's
because I'm putting myself exactly. I know what my children are going to have to go through. For me, it's definitely not been any easier than anybody else here. And wow, and I think we try to protect them, but that's not very wise. Protecting them, I think. My kids are now 18, 19. I wish I had this wisdom 20 years ago. But it's not protecting them, it's educating them.
Right. The best protection is education.
Yeah. Rabbi, I wish you've given this to me 20 years ago.
That's what I said when I learned it when I was 25. And believe it or not, Rabbi Ginsburg, in one of the times that he taught something similar to this, he said, I wish I would have known this when I was 16.
Yeah.
It would have saved me a lot of pain.
Yeah. From one sense I totally appreciate and understand, I feel I have the experience. From another sense, I've thought a lot about my background, which has been exactly, it's been very tumultuous. And in a good way, nothing, what I had to go through to mature. And then when I think about it, yes, I wish I had the Torah knowledge at the age of 16, but then again, I think maybe that's what it was meant for me to go through to get to where I am today, which quite frankly, I'm blessed. Thank God. My journey started 7 years ago. And of course, but again, when thinking about my children, it's a different experience. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
I want to...
Yes, please. I don't remember your name. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's Devorah Leah. So that's an abbreviation.
Right.
I wanted to ask you if you could talk again about the part when Esau goes to see Jacob. I missed a little bit there. And Jacob says he's going to get he wants his firstborn rights.
No, Esau was the firstborn. So Jacob,
right.
So Jacob, maybe I didn't hear you right. So Jacob wanted it from him. And Esau's argument...
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, but before he arrives there, what happens?
He was being chased apparently by somebody. It's not clear. The Medrash has all kinds of stories to fill in the gap. But he ends up coming to Jacob, and he's out of breath, and he says, feed me, because if I don't eat, I'm going to die. And so we explained that this statement, I'm going to die, is not like I'm about to die, I'm physically about to die. It's not about his imminent death. It expresses his despair from life. The Medrash, for instance, says that he came back from stealing and hunting and murdering and doing all kinds of things. And he was in despair of himself. He said, if this is what my life is always going to be like, so why what good is my life then? And that's why he's willing to give up his firstborn rights. So Esau is likened to a person who sacrifices in the field. Somebody who's given in to the evil. To give in to the evil means that I've despaired from ever dealing with it. I've despaired of it ever going away. I've basically despaired of God because I've despaired of the good. And that only happens if I think that I'm the one who's fully in control here. And if it's all up to me. And I created the world. And I put myself in this situation. All these things are incorrect, of course. But they lead to despair because the person feels that short of a miracle, there's nothing that can help him.
Okay, thank you. And then also the part where you talk about Moab. Is it?
Right. That's in Kings, in the second Kings. It was a short thing that I talked about. That was an example that when you corner somebody, when you push them with their back to the wall, they will do a lot to get out of that situation. And evil inside us, meaning the negative things inside us, will act the same way. If you try to slaughter it, if you try to get rid of it completely, those things that really fight back, that you can't overcome, and you're not willing to give the bribe, if you're not willing to work with it in some way, then it will come back to hurt you. It will hurt you, meaning you'll lose whatever you thought you're gaining, which is what happened there in the war between the Israelites and the Moabites. That they lost the war because the Moabites were with their back to the wall. So even with the evil inside, you don't want to do that. You don't push it to such an extent that its only course of action is to kill you. You push it in such a way that you're gaining ground. And you learn to work with it. Okay?
And then the other, okay, and again, thank you. And then the part where you say once the exile, the only thing I didn't understand is then it's like when you learn this, then you just you've conquered it, and you don't need to deal with it anymore. I got a little confused there.
You said that there are two goats. The one goat represents the way we describe that you deal with evil by sort of like a negotiation, like bribing it. And acknowledging that you didn't set up the world the way it is, and that you're going to have to deal with this evil inside of you, and you have to find a way to overcome it in some way by giving it a bribe, by doing whatever you need to do. That's the one option. But there's an equal possibility, another goat, which becomes the direct sacrifice to God. And that means that there's another possibility that all the evil is just going to be disappearing from the world in the next moment. And you have to keep both possibilities equal in your eyes, meaning I may have to negotiate with the evil in me for the next 100 years, and I may be freed of it in the next moment. And both options are just as true. I'm not despairing of either one. Okay? With a slight preference to the one that says that all the negativity will be cast out of the world in the next moment. Because again, it's a feeling that it's God's world. He knows how long, there's a pasuk, Ketz Sam Lachoshech, that there's an end to the darkness. There's a certain moment when you finished. If the world was just up to us, we're the only ones in charge here, so who knows how long it could take. It might take us forever to eradicate evil. We may never be successful. But because this is God's world, that option that all the evil can be finished in a moment is just as realistic as that we'll have to deal with it for the next 100 years. Okay, so that's what the two equal goats represent, these two options.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very, very interesting because just like the other people who talked before, I think, in my case, my life would have been so much easier, I think, if I had had this perspective before. Because I feel the world is actually very often the opposite. There's a push to do it perfectly.
Of course, which is completely unrealistic and prideful. It's very prideful, very arrogant to think that it could be that way. Thank you.
So very fascinating topic. Thank you.
Okay, Ilana, and I guess we'll finish with Ilana.
I wanted to ask you, in terms of our we have natural innocence. We're born with certain talents or drives. Like for instance,
I didn't understand. Say it slowly, because
we're born with certain talents, right? Or drives.
Right.
That are part of, like from the Mazalot.
Okay.
Somebody who's a Leo will just say, love to do graphic design because they love to create. Just say.
Let's say.
So how does it work? Is that talent by itself neutral, or is that talent evil until it's used for good?
All the talents can be used for good. Everything.
Right, but just say I want to paint a vase. So I'm not a vase on a table. Like I want to just paint a vase on a table, and people like to do that. So if I'm not doing that for the Shabbos table, I'm just doing because I want to do it. Is that evil?
No, it's just
So it's just
self-serving.
neutral.
It's self-serving, and self-serving has a problem, but it's not evil.
So then if it's self-serving, then it comes from the side of evil. I mean,
It's not from this. It's not in front of God. It's not. It's not.
That's what we're talking about here. So if I want to paint a picture of a pig, just say, then that's obviously completely out of the question. But
Why?
I can possibly paint a picture of a vase on a Shabbos table, and that's grabbing my Yetzer Torah.
Right.
So that's
but again, you have to be aware enough of your actions to ask what this is serving. Is it serving me or serving God?
So we don't do. We're talking about just things that are general things inside us. We're not talking about actual evil. We're not bribing.
No, when I was discussing, in this class, I meant things that are really negative. For instance, if I keep sleeping and I miss Kriyas Shema and I miss davening time, so that's negative.
But if you get up and have a cup of coffee, the coffee per se is not.
Right.
It's bribing negative,
It's bribing.
but it's not even itself.
So that's what I said, that at a certain level, you have to be willing to accept that I didn't sacrifice, meaning I didn't give in to the evil. I just bribed it. I just threw the goat off the cliff, and if it comes out alive, it comes out alive. If it comes out dead, it comes out dead. I don't care. I'm not sacrificing, meaning I'm not devoted to the evil. To sacrifice is like to devote yourself.
Right, but in this particular case, you would be devoted, because for the next 2 hours you're going to be painting.
Not sure why the painting is evil, but okay, I guess.
I'm trying to say in real life, because there's more things than just sleeping. And, in general, if we don't want to do evil things, so what are these things?
There's a lot of negative things that we do in life.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring my children, right? Today I didn't have time for one of my kids, but my wife said you have to be with him for at least an hour. He really needs you. So I said okay. So I thought long and hard, and we ended up doing something that I wanted to do. So that was sort of like negotiating with the evil inside of me that said, ignore him altogether, he'll be fine. And in the end, finishing by saying, okay, I'll bribe myself we'll do something together that I need, that I want. It ended up being something that he wanted also, but at least it started out as something that I wanted. That's not a very good thing. I should just give my time to him freely. Okay? Okay, thanks everybody for joining. I hope to see you next week. I hope our numbers increase. Maybe send it to friends and other people.
When are we going to talk about nothingness?
Oh, we're going to continue at some point. So first of all, in the ladies' class on Tuesdays, so that's what I decided that the topic last week was so interesting that I turned it into a series. So in the ladies' class on Tuesdays, which goes up on the Patreon, we're going to do that for at least 5-6 weeks. So it'll be there. Okay.
Is that another class, a ladies' class?
Yes, there's a ladies' class on Tuesdays at 12:15 noon, 12 noon in Israel time. So that's like 5 in the morning in New York.
Oh wow!
But you don't have to watch it live. You can go to patreon.com/mgenuth, and you'll find all my classes there. I'll write it in the chat. I'll write it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it was a pleasure seeing everybody, and again, hope to see you again next week. So I just wrote in the chat, patreon.com/mgenuth.
Thank you. Thank you for this great class.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye, Lawrence.
Bye-bye.